Thank you all so much for being here today. We're very, very excited to have you with us. We didn't expect this many people, so this is exciting. How I'm going to fit 45 minutes, the whole evolution of consciousness and Tonglen Therapy into 45 minutes is a mystery, but we're going to give it a go. Charisse Lyons and myself are Tonglen practitioners, which is something that we have started doing in the last 3 years. And in order for you to understand the capacity that Charisse has in doing the kind of work that she does, I think that it's very important that I give you some sort of a framework and context in terms of the evolution of consciousness. If we succeed today in just having many, many questions rise up inside of you, we feel like we will have succeeded. We are also available for teachings, retreats, pilgrimages, trainings all over the world for whoever might be interested in the communities in which you, the communities to which you belong. So let's start right away with the very beginning. 13.8 billion years ago, consciousness itself, which is the energy of pure love and truth, involved itself into matter. There was a great flaring forth, and this particular universe came into being. One universe of infinite numbers of universes, but we will only talk about consciousness entering matter into the time-space realm in this particular universe. So that's what happened 13.8 billion years ago. You, humans, are merely a speck that has appeared in the last minute of this cosmic calendar. And so about 200,000 years ago, humans came into being, and this is the first time that there is a structure that can become aware of itself as consciousness, and that is each and every one of you is capable of that. You're capable of bringing your awareness into full consciousness of yourself as truth and love. Sri Aurobindo, the great Hindu mystic, called this process involution, where consciousness enters form. Every religious tradition has attempted to talk about the qualities of what is unnameable and ineffable, timeless and spaceless. We can't talk about what it is, we can just say words that point towards what consciousness is, and yet each of you knows it intimately because it is what you are. In the Christian tradition, we talk about omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient. That is what consciousness is. Not only is consciousness all of those words, but it is also intentional and intelligent. Max Planck says all matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particles of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. So in the Christian tradition, in John, we hear in the beginning was the Word. The Word is actually the blueprint. It is the map. It is the design. The word word and the word rose come from exactly the same origin. The etymology of the two words are the same. So in the West, we have the rose as the symbol of the enlightened state, as the lotus in the East. So we are taught with it's not commonly known, but the matrix or the wisdom or the blueprint of all creation is referred to as Sophia in the Old Testament and then the Word in the New Testament. In terms of Buddhism and Hinduism, everybody knows Indra's net, which is talking about the interconnectedness of all life and all matter. Everything in the universe is interconnected. And that is pointing again to the map, and at the quantum level, we can see this in string theory. I don't have time to go into quantum. If you want extra information or teachings on that, of course, we are available. Each individual is one, but also part of the one. I love this representation of Indra's net because you see the wave, you see the interconnection, and you see each soul as a star shining. Einstein said, "We are slow down sound and light waves, a walking bundle of frequencies tuned into the cosmos, We are souls dressed up in sacred biochemical garments, and our bodies are the instruments through which our souls play their music. I think that is a beautiful vision for humanity that is not realized. But I'd like you to imagine that if each and every human was indeed clear and their awareness was in alignment with consciousness itself, that this is what it would look like. Now, the great flaring forth, the great creation of this universe is replicated in the life of each and every single human being that is ever born on this planet. So within the first 5 years of your life, you have already moved through 13.8 billion years of evolution. You are, in fact, every realm of consciousness. You are infinite consciousness, and you are in matter in this experience of space and time. That points to 3 realms of consciousness. The goal, of course, is to be fully aware of ourselves as witness to every state of consciousness that we are experiencing co-consciously at all time. Is there anyone in this room that is capable of that as yet? Okay. So in this representation, I could actually draw 7 billion circles, all of it originating in infinite consciousness, and every life beginning its cyclical journey back to the source. The goal and purpose of every life is for you to become fully aware of yourself as that consciousness. However, very few people will ever be able to do that on our planet. We know that about 75% of the world's population will live and die in unaware ego consciousness. Very few people will ever begin an evolution of their soul, which is the turning of the eye inward to become fully conscious of what you truly are and what capacity you actually have. So I want to look a little more deeply at just the evolutionary cycle of one human life. You have to understand this is so brief. It's almost sacrilegious to do it in this way. But I want you to at least get the few basic principles. So when you are born, it is matter, spirit into matter. This first quadrant represents ages, very roughly, very grossly, ages 1 to 5. In that state of consciousness, which is spacious soul consciousness, a young child, an infant, is one with consciousness, but also one with matter and instinct. And a little baby does not know itself as anything different than that. It is the mother's breast. It doesn't discern itself as something separate and individual as yet. That is a gradual process. However, very rapidly, by the age of 5, the child moves out of that archaic, magical, mythical consciousness and right into rational, intellectual consciousness. Now, how that happens is because when the needs of a small child are not adequately met, it creates suffering. And the suffering is fear, instinctual fear, and then, of course, the secondary emotion of shame. And so you leave the Garden of Eden, you feel suffering. That is what we call suffering, is the internal emotional misery that is created when your needs are not met. Very quickly, the socialization process kicks into place, and that suffering is covered over by intellect, by behaviors, and by what we call our personality, our ego functioning. We live in ego defense, that is your personality. So everyone in this room, I am quite sure, knows the experience of being a little child and being shamed when you did not meet your parents' expectations. So, is there anybody who doesn't know that experience? All right, you all know it. So you felt the shame of not meeting expectations. What is it that you learned to do so that you did not feel shame? Anybody want to volunteer something? A hand, a brave hand.
Just don't always tell your parents the truth.
Don't tell the truth. So you learn to lie, you learn to hide, deny, repress, sublimate, dissociate, hide, right? We all know that one. We also learned to do people pleasing. I'm sure this is a room of people pleasers, caretakers, rescuers, fixers, humanitarians, and people who do a lot of good things in the world in order to not feel shame. You want to be good rather than bad. The possibility of love doesn't exist in this state of consciousness. What we're doing here is being good in order to avoid being shamed. That is not love. In this quadrant, the second quadrant, what we will see is a great deal of sympathy and pity, which is superior, one up, help poor you, not have your feelings and not have your sufferings. So we will have 100 techniques and tactics that we teach people. Any other psychologists in this room right now? Right? We teach people to say affirmations, be grateful, do good things, and you'll feel better. You won't feel shame, you won't feel bad. This is the heart and soul of codependency. So in this quadrant, we have sympathy and pity. It is only when we start realizing that our lives are not fulfilled, when we realize we feel empty, that no matter what we've done in the external world, it is not bringing us the fulfillment and joy and love and peace and hope and the vision of what we have had for our lives, that we start asking the important questions. Who am I? What am I doing? What's this about? Why am I suffering? Why do I feel empty? Why do I feel unfulfilled? E. Cummings says, he who asks the beautiful question gets the beautiful answer. As you start asking questions of yourself and developing a witness who can observe yourself, that is the beginning of an evolutionary process to turn inwards. If we turn inwards, we will start recognizing the deep underlying suffering that is the groundswell of all of our behaviors until this point. And in this quadrant now, when you start turning inwards, the possibility for empathy and understanding start happening for the suffering that you have endured your entire life. But this is still a very cognitive thing. And indeed, in the Buddhist practice of Tonglen, which is an advanced practice, we will sit quietly and attempt to see what the pain and the darkness and the suffering is and bring what is needed to that suffering. That needs to happen first for ourselves. If we practice this long enough and we develop some capacity for empathy and understanding, what happens is the heart starts opening. When the heart starts opening, then we willingly, gladly will be present to ourselves with the maturity of a loving soul to the wounded soul. And it is in that relationship of love that there is healing that starts happening, that the suffering of our lives starts being brought to the light, the shadow starts being brought to the light, and that is when we start becoming whole. The enormous split that happens between our body and our emotions and our head and our defenses starts healing. This is a huge split in the whole of humanity, and it has to be healed. And that only happens when the heart starts opening. The fullest realization of Tonglen practice is when you are capable of embodying in your heart, in your mind, in your body, and in your emotions the early suffering of your life, and bring to it your love, because that is what is needed. You bring to it your love, and you bring to it the value that you see in your human life. So you start meeting the needs of yourself. When you can do this with every aspect of your lost parts of yourself, it is only then that you will awaken to the fullest realization that you are willing to do that for any other human being on this planet as well. Whew, okay, how am I doing for time? We getting there? Have I got 1 minute left?
You're doing great.
I'm doing.
A lot of time.
I've got a lot of time. So what is the practice of Tonglen, which is what Charisse and I do? Charisse has managed to sink to the deepest level of the quantum, of the map, and beyond that, so that she can hold in her own being the suffering of another human being. And Walt Whitman said this so beautifully many years ago: I do not ask the wounded person how he feels, I myself become the wounded person. And this is indeed the work that Charisse does. It is the intersection of the individual one merging with the one. And in that state, you are open on the matrix to be able to receive into your own being the suffering of the world. The practice of Tonglen is no different to the practice of the cross. whether Christ took on the suffering of the world into his own being and integrated all opposites within himself. That at least is the myth of Christianity. It is no different to Tonglen Therapy as practiced in the Buddhist tradition. So the intersection of the one and the one is what each and every one of you is required to do. What is happening and what Charisse does and is capable of is innate within every human being. It is your divine responsibility to embrace this process, because unless we do, the splits and the hatred that we have within ourselves, the conflict we have within ourselves, is what is projected out into the world and creates every war and every horror that is known to mankind. So our first and foremost responsibility is to heal the splits within ourselves and to know that within your consciousness is the possibility of being aware not only of your ego or of your empathy or of your understanding, but you are capable of sinking in meditation practice to the level of the matrix and beyond, and to bring the love of what is to the world. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Charisse, and she is going to explain to you exactly what we do in individual sessions, and also, of course, in our group work and our international outreach.
Hello. I'm going to tell you that I've told this story many times, never in a stage like this. And it's not a comfortable story for me to tell. It's not an easy story to tell. But it is a story, I think it's loud enough. Can everybody hear me?
It is nicer when you're close.
Okay, yeah. All right. It is a story that I consider to be my purpose. So hang in there with me with my nervousness and understand that although it's not easy, I do this with a great purpose. I take it very seriously. It's important information to share. The purpose of what I'm going to do today is that I want you to, when you're leaving, to understand what it is that we do in these sessions. I want you to understand what it means for you and what it means for our world. But in order to do that, I think I have to tell you a little bit about my story first. And I have an extensive history of trauma, starting from a very young child until young adulthood. And what's unique about my situation is somehow, by some grace, I knew to always go in. And so as trauma was happening to me, I was able to not become disconnected. And those of you that work in this profession know that when there's trauma, we often dissociate. We numb ourselves. We think that the shame that is being put into us belongs to us, and so we become nothing but shame. We think that the fear that surrounds us is us, and so we become very fearful. And I don't understand the process of a little tiny girl that was able to realize that to go in was my way of survival. And so it's important to know that what I'm telling you today and this capacity that I have, I didn't do that to be able to stand here today. I did it to survive. And I'm going to tell you one story will, I think, show what it was like. I was 6, and in this situation, there was a severe trauma that was happening. And I love this, actually, that I was always connected to this part of myself. I felt the warmth, I felt the light, I felt the love in this place. Our soul. And I, as a 6-year-old, called it my light bulb, which I love. And I would feel when that light bulb was dimming. And I would look for ways to fill it back up. On this particular day, During this trauma, I could feel that it was dimming. And there was a window over here. And I looked at that light from the window, and as a 6-year-old, I started to literally use my hands to pull the light so that I was filling my light bulb. I was making it bright again. And as a 6-year-old, I'm sure that I thought I was pulling something external into me internally. But that isn't correct. What I know now is that I was in touch with the love that was in myself. I went to the place of my suffering and I brought the light within that to my light bulb. And I have many, many stories like that. That's how I survived. That's how this capacity was born. After this, as an adult, I became a teacher. And for 30 years, I was a speech therapist. I was in the school system, working with kindergarten through 5th grade. And it was a great career. I was good at it. I was very involved in the building. I had impact on a lot of kids' lives. But I knew always that there was a purpose that I was missing, that I was not doing something I was supposed to do. And I could not, I couldn't figure it out. About 3 years ago, it became such a crescendo that I was agitated. I knew that this was the time. I had to figure it out. And by some kind of, they seem like preordained ways that it happened, I met Lyndall. And we began to have conversations. And the conversations were mostly of spiritual nature, but always rooted in suffering. Always rooting in how is the spirituality coming from suffering. We had no idea where these conversations were going to lead us. We had no idea that 3 years after these conversations started, we would be standing right here. We weren't looking for it, but it happened. And we know that it is the purpose of what both of us are supposed to do. And so here we are, nervous as can be. Soon after those conversations started, some really unusual things started to happen in me. There was expansions that happened within me. Nighttime is a very active time for me because I think ego is really suppressed at nighttime. And so I wake up, I'm very alert. I'm not sleepy, it's not trancy, but I will experience knowings. I'll just know something. And so I'm going to tell you a few of these pretty incredible quantum type information that I would just know, and I have no reason to know that. I'm not a scientist. I haven't studied quantum. I'm not a mathematician. I can barely balance my checkbook. So these knowings were awe-inspiring to me and also very confusing. What's going on here? I'll just tell you a few of them. I have over 400 recordings of the things that have happened in our conversations. The first one I'm going to tell you about is I woke and I experienced I experienced myself as being part of a wave formation, a very beautiful wave formation, a lot of waves working together, all individual but all connected. In that, I had a knowing that this wave held a complete capacity for love and truth. And I felt it. I was infused with it. Most beautiful feeling I've ever felt. I was also aware that there was a lot of interruption in that wave. And that part of it was hate, it was shame, it was fear. So I experienced both. The next week, I had another experience where I woke up with this, again, very alert, knowing, and I knew an equation. I just knew it. And I had, by this point, I was keeping a pencil and paper next to my bed and pulled that over and started to write this incredibly complicated math equation. I couldn't get it all down. And in the morning, I did a search and I put in only what I had remembered, and up came the information that it was the equation, the quantum equation for waveform. This is when I go to Lyndall and I say, please don't think I'm insane. There was another situation in which I woke up again very alert, and I knew a graph. And I had this incredible urgency to draw the graph. And so I grabbed a piece of paper, I drew it in complete detail, and I knew, I had no idea what it was, but I knew that it meant that the one of individual is the same as the one of unity, of connection. I refer to it as the one, the small o, and the one with the big O. One. In the morning, I again did my search. I put in quantum and the theory for 1 to 1, or something like that. And up came string theory and a graph that matched almost perfectly what I had drawn. Exactly. That's what I did. I laughed and just shook my head and went, I don't know. I am a questioner. All of this, every step of the way, I questioned. I wondered, how could this be? Lyndall, she doesn't question.
Oh, I do. I'm a terrible cynic, believe me. But this, no.
Yeah, and that is true. I know that about you. It's true. Anyway, to help me validate what was happening, we decided to contact Brian Swim. He's a quantum cosmologist. And he graciously responded and said, I'm not your guy, but I know who is. And he referred us to another man who's written a book about the stages and states after death. And we contacted him, had some kind of phone conversations where he was making sure we weren't crazy. And he then invited us to come and spend some time with him. His words when he decided was, I have no idea what's happening with you, but it's profound, and will you please come? And so we did. We spent 4 days with him, and during that time, he taught us his book and listened to my story. We actually read the book before we went, and while I was reading it, it was incredibly difficult, but I would read something and go, oh, I think I know this experience, and I would write a summary of that experience, so that when we were with him, I had a list of 15 to 20 different experiences in which I wanted him to validate that this was correct. I wanted to know that it actually did match. And he validated every single one. And I was both so incredibly relieved and also terrified. What does this mean? What does this purpose mean for me? To have this type of expansion opening up in me. Some people have asked, a lot of people have asked, or said, you have an incredible gift. I think that's really a dangerous way to look at it, because that makes it seem as though something was given to me and put into me. It's not the truth. all that happened is through this work of surviving, through meeting that suffering with love, I was deepening my way from the place of knowing myself as one in body and form to the place of one outside of time and space. And that is the foundation of every single one of us. And so I always, when someone says, what an incredible gift, I always say, thank you so much, but I don't think it's that. What's in me is in you, every single one of us. I want you to think about the circle that Lyndall put up, and I want you to think about pulling that circle straight. Are you going back to it? Pulling that straight, and when you pull that straight, you'll see that this is the continuum that we all are on in developing ourselves from what we know as little babies. We know ourselves as one within time and space, individual within time and space. But our lifespan, through our lifespan, we begin to realize that we are more than just that one in time and space. For example, think about yourself if you walk into a room and you are aware, you see somebody and you're aware and you go, that person is sad. You can see their sorrow. And in further interaction, you can feel their sorrow. You feel it. It becomes a part of you. Or maybe you walk into a room and someone is filled with so much joy and their exuberance is contagious and you're attracted to it, and then you feel that joy. Or maybe you walk into a room and for some reason it's not comfortable. You can't see anything, but it doesn't feel safe. And you notice that in yourself. Those are all indications that you are yourself expanding outside of your body and time and space and feeling and intuiting what's happening outside of time and space, outside of your body. Do you see? And so what happens in me is I just go further. I go to the level of one. And that brings me to our sessions. In our sessions, what I want to do, I want you to just play along a little bit. I'm going to tell you what it's like for a client who comes in with us into our room. And I want you to imagine that you have made the decision to see your soul suffering, to actually feel the depth of your deepest suffering. And think about that for a minute. What would that feel like? Are you aware of the resistance you might have? Are you aware of the fear you might have? It takes a lot of courage for people to decide to do this work. And so when they come into the room, I spend some time talking with them and explaining this idea of the continuum and showing them that, yes, you too have this capacity. I'm no different. I'm no different than you. We're on the same path, every single one of us. And what leads us to taking that path on, if you think about it, everyone in this room is seeking something or you wouldn't be here. And what caused you to seek? It's your suffering. At some point you started to ask questions, saying, there's gotta be more. What's the purpose of all of this? Why am I doing this? Am I correct? Every single one of us, that's how it happened. So we go through talking about the session, and then I explain to them that I'm going to spend some time, I'm going to go to a deep meditative state, which is actually very active. I have to lay because my body moves. When I go to this deep meditative state, the client is on one side, Lyndall's on the other side. and I begin to merge. I allow that suffering to come into me. And so if I feel sorrow, I will cry. But it's not my tears, it's the tears of the client. One way to understand this is, if you are buying into the idea of quantum, every cell of our body is actually the entirety of the universe. And so when I sink to that level, every cell of my body is a receiver and also an expressor. And so I move, I cry in the same way that they did during their trauma, their whatever the event of the suffering was. There have been many, many times that I've had clients who have had sexual trauma, and I experienced their rape. And I want you to consider what it is for them to have someone be with them in their deepest moment of suffering. That just does not happen. We do our deepest suffering all alone. And so that in itself is miraculous for many of the clients that we work with. So if I go into a situation where I feel fear, my body will often shake. I have clients who will say, and my body's recepting, it's receiving. And I have had many times where clients will say, I rubbed at the blanket just exactly that same way. Or, you're doing this thing with your feet that I do every single night. That's how I get myself to sleep. And it's all because it's quantum in action. We need to see that quantum is our life. Quantum is our spirituality. Science and spirituality merge. They are the same. In this situation, Lyndall is also present. She doesn't like to talk about her accolades, but I will. She has over 30 years experience of working with severe trauma. She lived in apartheid. She worked with racial tensions, sexual abuse. She experienced many of these things, and she's not afraid to go into her own suffering. So what she brings to this session is unbelievably important. During this session, she will have conversation with the client and the soul which is in me. And bringing those two together is like, we've laughed and called it couples therapy. Because what it's doing is it's identifying the split in each client. And so, in the process of this, we begin to bridge going from judgment to acceptance. So how many of us have judgment of ourselves? And wouldn't it be so wonderful if we could bring love to that and turn judgment into acceptance? We bring fear to a little bit more safety. We bring hatred to love. Those are the reasons why we do these sessions and what is so important. A lot of times people ask if I'm getting hurt. And that's an important question. I can always feel when it's a client that is really concerned about my own safety. And because I've done my shadow work, I do feel every bit of the pain. I feel it. But I'm like a container that is empty. And that allows the information from the client to fill that empty space. I don't let them mix. I know what's mine, I know what's theirs. Therefore, yes, I feel it. No, I'm not being harmed. At the end of the session, it goes back. I don't keep it. Often, really often, especially from people who are close to me and are concerned about it, ask, why do you do this, Charisse? What's the purpose? And for me, it's all about the healing. When I go back to my experience of myself on that wave, where I could identify the capacity for love and truth, and also the interruption of judgment and hate, how could it be, there could be nothing more profound than a purpose of healing that. First, individually, within an individual. What we all know is that as individuals, when our internal relationship is split or filled with hate or judgment, that's the first thing that comes out in world. And what we've seen over and over is healing in our clients, that then, once this is connected and working from a place of love, it is healing the world. It's rippling. And that's the thing that I think happens so much more and is all about the quantum of the ripple effect that happens when we do our internal work. But it has to come from internal, individually first. On our website and in our mission statement, we use the phrase, healing the world from the inside out. And I think it describes perfectly what we're doing with the sessions. So thank you for listening. I'm going to have Lyndall wrap up a few things. And I made it.
I'd really ask you all, please, if you are interested in individual work, group work, training of professionals, or bringing Tonglen Therapy to your communities in whatever capacity, we are available. Last year we did 6 weeks in South Africa in a township that was profoundly changing for the entire community. So we are available in whatever capacity you would like. And finally, this just to sum it up, if we wish to create peace, love, and joy here on earth, then we must awaken and deepen to this within ourselves. Only then will it genuinely and authentically ripple out into the world spontaneously, authentically, and without effort. The path is a descent into the unaware suffering of our lives. We are seeking the suffering God. We are the suffering God, and we are the loving God that must seek to reconcile and embrace every lost part of ourselves. We must turn our eye inward. I believe that humanity is on the brink of a huge quantum shift in consciousness, as all of you believe, and I believe that this is the shift that has to happen. Humanity must turn its eye inward. We must stop projecting and blaming and attacking the world, which is merely a projection of our own self-hatred. There is no ascent without descent. All of us want to get into spiritual bypass. We want to avoid the suffering. We want to do the affirmations. We want to be happy. We want to, and that is moving ever further away from consciousness itself into more defense. I urge you, please, to find the spiritual bypass within yourself and to make a commitment today to sink deeply into the suffering of your soul and heal yourselves so that you can be agents of sacred service in our very, very largely suffering world. Thank you all so very much.